This is the Farm Voices podcast, sharing information about regenerative agriculture, climate resilience, and agricultural policy in the United States. I'm Kevin Castle.
I'm speaking with Tim Connelly, the farm director, and Andrew Woodruff, the regenerative agriculture consultant from the Island Grown Initiative farm on the island of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. Hi!
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
What is the Island Grown Initiative, and how did this organization come about?
So Island Grown is a 501c3 nonprofit in Martha's Vineyard. We were founded in 2006 as a farmer support organization. So back then, that was before we had the farm. It was a really small group of people working really hard to support island farmers. So there's a bunch of different initiatives. We were working on a slaughterhouse for local livestock producers. We started the mobile poultry processing unit for the island, which is still operating. And it was a kind of a grassroots effort to increase food production on the island. In 2007, there was an offshoot called Island Grown Schools, which was about bringing food, farming, and cooking education into all the schools on the island, which is still running, which is crazy. It's approaching 20 years old at this point. And yeah, we have changed a lot over the years. So in recent years, we have shifted our mission to building a regenerative and equitable food system on Martha's Vineyard. So what we do now is very different. The organization is much bigger than those earlier days. And we have 3 different departments. We're running a farm. We do the Island Grown Schools education piece, like I said, and then we have a whole other food equity component too. So I can get into more detail with that, or we can save that for later, however you want to do it.
That's a great overview. Thank you.
I believe the founders were all women. And I think one of their goals was to get healthy food into the school system. If I'm not mistaken, I could even.
Yeah, and that was a big piece of Island Grown Schools when they first started, was the education piece, but also getting more locally grown food into school cafeterias, which was huge.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you for that work. Speaking as a mom. What is the overall mission of the organization and kind of the main programs that you run to achieve that mission now?
Yeah, so our mission now is to build a regenerative and equitable food system on Martha's Vineyard. So we do that by joining our 3 current departments. So the farm is one, so that's where Andrew and I work, and we're focused on using climate-smart regenerative growing techniques to produce food for the island. We'll probably go into more detail about the farm, but we're doing a lot of diversified vegetable production. We do small grains. We do composting. We have pastured poultry for eggs, and we do a bunch of biodiversity work, and we're trying to make a staffing model so our farmers here are making a living wage, not overworking themselves while producing this food. So that's the farm piece. The education component is linking students on the island from pre-K through grade 12 and some adults to the farm and teaching them how to grow food, how to cook food, where their food is coming from. So that's a huge piece. And then the third piece is our food equity department. So around 2020, we merged with the Island Food Pantry, and we shifted our focus to growing a lot of food for people in need. So about 30% of what we produce on the farm is given for free to our food equity programs. And that includes the food pantry, like I mentioned. We do a mobile market program that accepts SNAP and HIP benefits. We have a kitchen space where we produce meals for students in the summer and for elders throughout the winter. And probably forgetting something else. But those are the 3 main departments and our areas of focus.
Mm-hmm. And then your geographic range or area where you intend to impact the food system. Can you explain a little bit about that range?
Yeah, so we're really just focused on Martha's Vineyard. So we're 100-ish square miles, and there are 6 towns, right? I'm not forgetting any towns. So we're very locally focused. We have connections off island, especially our education programs, our all the departments, really, the food equity programs. We on the farm, we're always linking with similar organizations and other farmers off island, but our area of focus and impact is Martha's Vineyard.
And if I'm correct, you have a substantial seasonal fluctuation in residents on the island?
Yeah, I don't even know what the numbers are anymore, but we basically gain like 100,000 people in the summer between visitors and day trippers and people who have seasonal residences here. It's a very huge explosion in population during the summer months.
And then those people go away and take this information with them, and you have this large ripple across the water, right?
Seeds scattering on the wind.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, I think, benefits of the work that we're doing, the regenerative work that we're doing here, is that we do have an audience that can come out and see the farm and take it beyond Martha's Vineyard, and also sometimes into influential places where maybe they can make a change. So we're trying to leverage that. We think it's important. We think the work that we're doing here is not just about Martha's Vineyard anymore. So
right, exactly. And do you partner with other organizations and farms on the island?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of community partners, many of which I'll forget to mention. But it's especially, I mean, the farm specifically, we are in constant communication with other farms. We run a gleaning program, so that 30% of food the farm produces that we donate is harvested by a couple of our employees, but mostly volunteers. And those volunteers also run the gleaning program for all the farms on the island. So if there's ever produce that's not going to be sold or they don't have staff to pick it, our team will go through, pick it, and distribute it through our food equity network. So, and the farm, we work with some regional organizations too. Like we still work with Mass Department of Ag. We work with NRCS. We work with American Farmland Trust. Who am I forgetting for us?
We have there's a farmer out in Western Mass that started a program called Momentum Ag, and
Lincoln Fishman. Yep.
Yes.
So Lincoln's a huge partner in the past couple of years. And then for our food equity programs and our education programs, there's a ton of partnerships. A lot of the food equity department is run by volunteers, so that's a huge resource for us. And there's all sorts of organizations working on food access and elder care and all that stuff that's rolled into one. And I'm not even going to try to list them all because I will definitely forget. It's not my department, but a lot of people joining together to make this work happen.
And contrary to what people may think of Martha's Vineyard, there are a lot of people in need here. It's a very expensive place to live, and there's a lot of housing challenges here and a lot of affordability challenges. So there is a real need for the work that's being done here.
Yep.
And could I step back for one moment just to make sure that our audience is aware of the gleaning program and the significance of that? Could you explain what gleaning is?
Yeah, so gleaning is typically when there is food that is not sellable for whatever reason. Like I said, you either don't have staff to pick it, or you don't have a market for it, or maybe the quality is like not something you necessarily want to sell through your normal customers, but still totally fine to eat. We will have gleaners go through and harvest it all, so it's not food waste. All that stuff is captured and being put to use. So we have one employee, Astrid, who's our gleaning manager, and they're organizing a gaggle of very dedicated volunteers who have been part of the program for years and years at this point. And they'll go around to local farms, harvest the produce, and send it to all over the island, basically. It'll go to the food pantry, it'll go to local schools, elder housing, anywhere that can take it and process it, we'll bring it to them. So they hit a lot of farms on the island, and then they are, like I said, instrumental in harvesting food here because we are donating 30% of what we grow.
So, as we mentioned, the Island Grown Initiative operates a working farm. The historical name of that farm was Thimble Farm, and now you call it the Island Grown Farm. Was the farm part of the organization's plans from the founding as a core part of the mission, or is that something that developed along the way?
It definitely developed. So in the earlier days, we were a farmer support organization. So IGI started in 2006, and then we weren't gifted the farm until 2012. And Andrew here was one of the people instrumental in making sure that the farm was safe for agricultural use and given to us. So I can let him go into more detail about that if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But when we got the farm, we were still in farmer support mode, so there wasn't really like a clear vision of what we were going to do with the land. We wound up leasing out most of the acreage to other local farmers just so they had extra fields and growing space to do livestock, poultry, vegetables, whatever they wanted to do. Around 2018 is when we started doing our regenerative ag trials, which we'll get into later. But that's when we started to shift towards producing our own food as Island Grown. That's also came about the time when we were getting ready to merge with the Island Food Pantry. So we made this kind of organizational shift to absorb the food equity piece of our mission into Island Grown. So it's really been since 2018 where we've started growing on our acreage and producing food ourselves, whereas before we were just trying to offer land to people. So since then, the farm has been a huge work in progress, but every year since 2018 we've been honing in on our practices, which we'll talk about later. But now we're almost entirely growing our own food. We have a couple other licensed out pieces for local growers, but otherwise we are growing on the whole acreage ourselves, more or less.
Is there a significance to the location of the land or the way that the land was acquired from the perspective of the organization's mission?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the farm is a pretty special place, just by itself. So we're just over about 40 acres, and we're right in the heart of the island. Our fields actually join 3 different towns. So part of the farm is in Tisbury, part of it is in Oak Bluffs, and then part of it is actually in West Tisbury. So we're like really dead center of the island where all these things intersect. We're also adjacent to a freshwater pond, which was huge historically. So this land was used extensively by the Wampanoag people as a thoroughfare because of the water source. And in terms of agriculture, it's been in production for like generations at this point, hundreds of years. So it's a really special property. There's a lot of history here. And there's a lot of, people like us who really care about the land. In terms of the organization's mission, this central nature of it makes it really nice for distributing food everywhere. It just makes traffic flow a lot easier and getting people out here a lot easier. But yeah.
School too. We have a lot of school trips and we're located in a good location for that.
Yeah, a huge part of the education piece is actually bringing students to the farm. So we'll have a lot of school field trips starting this time of year. It's early September, and they'll come help us harvest things. They'll do educational stuff, and we have a lot of students coming through the property every school year. So, yeah, that's a big piece of it too. Do you want to talk about farm history a little bit?
Sure, I'll mention a few words. So I've known this land since the early 70s. And in the 70s, the land was used as a corn silage farm for livestock production on another farm. And so it was intensively sort of mined, the soil, by extracting a lot of nutrients and a lot of biomass off the farm. It was all done conventionally. And then in the 1980s, the land had been picked up by a man who wanted to do a big U-pick strawberry farm, and they also built this huge hydroponic greenhouse out here. We have a 1-acre glass greenhouse here. And it was more of a hobby farm, but they took it really seriously. But they were also very much in the conventional mindset, and they used a lot of pesticides, fertilizers. And so in 2003, I believe, I ended up leasing the farm. After a series, this man retired and somebody else bought the farm. And at that point, the land had been really badly degraded. The soil was in really rough shape. And while I was an organic farmer, we did a lot of tillage, and tillage is not really long-term really healthy for the soil. So during my 8-year stint here, there was a lot of tillage. Ultimately wanted to do composting, but that's a whole challenge in and of itself. And anyhow, by the time I left, the land had been kind of beat up pretty badly over the course of almost 4 years. And then I'll talk more later about this whole restoration process that started 5 years ago and how successful that's been.
Yeah. The redemption piece.
Yeah. And I'd like to say, you can only imagine what this land looked like when the Wampanoags had it. There was so much sustained, built for thousands of years. Literally, people hunted this land. We've pulled hundreds and hundreds of arrowheads, beautiful arrowheads off this land, and so we're bringing it back to life, and hopefully they would be proud of us, because it was a mess for a while, to be honest.
And are there particular challenges or pressures associated with growing produce at your location, aside from the ones that you've mentioned in terms of the restoration project?
Yeah, I don't know if we face any challenges that are unique to us. I think they're general island challenges. There's not a lot of predators on the island, so we have a lot of rodents and small animals.
A lot of biodiversity.
A lot of biodiversity, which
sometimes
is
too much.
Yeah, which is a great thing until it starts affecting your crops. But yeah, I don't think. It's normal weather stuff here. Especially, I was farming off island for a little while too, so it's like anywhere else. You have your own little ecosystem that you have to learn to manage and work with. But I don't think there's anything particular.
Coastal regions are definitely a little bit more stressful, I think, than interior New England.
Yeah,
there's a soil health and just moisture, humidity, disease pressure, that kind of stuff. But we're gaining on that because we have healthier soil now.
Mm-hmm. Could you mention a few of the specific challenges of a coastal region, or explain those a little further?
Well, we have dew. We have a lot more fog and dew in the morning, which creates a lot of disease pressure. And that's probably the biggest one. I would say sometimes we have wind events that are more extreme than interior New England. We do have cold springs here because we're on the ocean, but in the fall we have warmer falls, so we benefit on the other side of the season. So yeah,
I would say I would just echo that. Kind of a late start to the season. The wind can be a challenge always. And yeah, humidity for me, it's like always, and other farmers face it too, but we've definitely had years where we've had crops die back way earlier than they should have. And it's just kind of like, it's just humidity. But
also we have fairly sandy soils, so they're poorer in nature, and their parent material is not as good as some other soils in the region.
Yeah, organic matter is lacking sometimes.
What are the main farm products that you grow at the farm? And can you give us an idea of the volume that you produce?
Yeah, so we're pretty diversified. Andrew mentioned we have our almost acre-large glass greenhouse. So in that, we'll do hydroponic lettuce. We have a hydroponic system that we'll do salad mix in. And then we have soil beds in the back where we'll do a mix of tomatoes and baby leaf greens throughout the fall and winter. And then in the fields, we're really diversified vegetables. So it's a lot of vegetables. We run a CSA, which we can get into later, so we keep it pretty diverse for our customers. We also do small grains out there as part of our field rotation, and we do pastured eggs. So those are the main ones. And altogether, the farm, depending on the year, we're growing between 100 and like 120,000 pounds of product every year. And we also do compost at almost a commercial scale. We don't really sell a lot of it. But we're doing now about between like 600 to 800 yards of screen compost every year. So those are the main products. Am I forgetting?
But I think, I can mention it now. I think it's important to mention that the farm probably could double that production easily, but we've been really committed to the soil health process that we've set in play 5 years ago, and so that number could easily change over time, but right now we're all about restoring the soil and bringing it up to a level where it can be more sustainable, and eventually over time it could produce more food. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an important point to mention that we I think often agriculture is driving the land too hard, and we chose to come at this from a different angle, partly because we can afford to.
Right.
And that's one of the things about it. We're in a unique position here as a nonprofit, but we also felt like that was a commitment that we needed to make to restore the land first, and increase production over time.
You touched on this already, but could you share one more time about the venues and methods that you are using to sell or distribute the produce?
Yeah, so we do a CSA. We do a summer and winter, so altogether it's about 10 months of CSA every year. And that takes maybe a third of what we grow currently. We do a little bit of wholesale to local restaurants and grocery stores. That piece we don't do too much because we are a nonprofit and we're not trying to compete with local farmers. And then the other third of what we grow is grown for donations. So that's where the gleaners come in and do a lot of the harvesting for us and bring it to whoever needs it, basically. So those are our main outlets.
And you mentioned that SNAP is part of your, you are selling at markets that accept SNAP, or you accept it.
Yeah, so we do run a mobile market program. So it's changed shape a little bit over the years, but we load up a truck and bring it around to different stops on the island. And we do accept SNAP and HIP there. And we're working towards, hopefully next year, we're going to start taking SNAP and HIP for our CSA payments as well. So
I want to ask some questions specifically about regenerative agriculture and your farming methods, but I want to first emphasize that you have a holistic outlook and you're applying regenerative agriculture principles beyond food production and the ecological services and beyond the property of your farm location to the surrounding land and the human community. But to speak about the farming methods specifically, Andrew, how did you become interested in regenerative agriculture? And based on your background in these practices, how do you define it?
So, about 10 years ago, after 35 years of farming intensively, I was starting to rethink my life and what I wanted to do as I was getting older, and there's a little wear and tear there over those decades. And I happened to get invited to a Ray Archuleta talk. He's a former NRCS employee that is well known in the Regen Circle for promoting regenerative agriculture. And he's one of the most impassionate speakers on the topic. And so I went to an all-day workshop, started learning about soil health and biology in ways that I had never really understood before. And I knew that my life was about to change, but I just didn't know how. I walked out of that room knowing that something big was going to happen, but I just didn't know what. And so I came back to the Martha's Vineyard and I started rethinking the whole way I was farming, and started doing more research on regenerative farming. And I went to a few more workshops. And then within a year, I was starting to really start to implement regenerative practices, in part on this land here at IGI, where I was still leasing a small parcel of land. And then a few years down the road, I realized I didn't want to run my own business anymore. And COVID hit. Well, it was actually pre-COVID, a year before COVID, 2 years before COVID. I started a conversation with Island Grown Initiative about the possibility of doing sort of a model, small-scale regenerative project out here on this farm. And from there, when COVID hit, it just kind of blew up into this whole system approach for the entire farm. And it's been a real learning experience. Every day is a learning experience. And it's been a really amazing new way to think through farming, this whole experience. You had another question in there. I think I missed the other part.
I did. How do you define regenerative agriculture?
Well, I think it's really important to realize that regenerative farming doesn't have a legal term, right? And there are a lot of different camps out there, and how you view what really is truly regenerative. But for me, it's, baseline principles, there's 5, 6, 7 principles out there that are getting kicked around. Restoring biological systems, and ecological systems like water cycling, nutrient cycling, carbon cycling. All of this involves the atmosphere in some form or another. So that's really what it's all about. And I think it takes just a total shifted mindset of being open to new ways and learning a different perspective on soil, and being open to possibilities you can probably never even imagine could happen as a farmer.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. And thinking of farming methods, what regenerative agriculture practices are essential to the operations at the Island Grown Farm?
You want to take
share
that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, so really, Andrew started this program in 2018 on a couple acres on the other side of the farm. And I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very experimental. So basically, like, one of our privileges as being a nonprofit is we're not driven by a profit model of trying to, like, make all this money on veggie sales, basically. So we have wiggle room where we can try to basically figure out what's going to work for our property and our fields and what we want to grow. So there's been a lot of iterations of different practices, which is probably why we both chuckled at each other, because we like to change things up every couple of years. But the main thing is, like Andrew mentioned, we're trying to adhere to a few principles in terms of keeping soil covered, keeping living roots in the soil, reducing tillage as much as possible, working animals in wherever we can, which is where our chickens come through, and a couple sheep that we have on the property. But yeah, we're honing it in now, but I think we for a while we're just trying to experiment a lot.
Yeah, so I would add to that we're really focused on the principles, but there's more than one way to do all of this, and context that really matters. So when you're talking about regenerative farming to California to Martha's Vineyard, it's going to be two different scenarios, but the general principles are the same worldwide. And so we at the beginning of this whole process, what I walked out of Ray Archuleta's talk with was that we really need the whole package to make this work. And grazing animals was a big part of that. So we've implemented grazing animals into our vegetable rotation, which is somewhat unique. And we're seeing tremendous positive effects of that. And I've heard other growers and other scientists talk about that's kind of one of the missing links in agriculture. So I really feel strongly about returning animals to the system, because that's how it used to be. A farm in the 1930s always had animals. It wasn't strictly corn and soy. And a vegetable farm should have animals, in my opinion, or could benefit strongly from animal rotations as well.
And what kind of animals are those that you're bringing onto the field?
So a smaller vegetable farm like us, we're sticking to chickens and sheep right now. We've had turkeys, we've had pigs, and we've had goats, but now we're down to chickens and sheep. Really, I would love to have cows, but you would need 100 acres to do that properly. Or bigger ruminants.
Yeah, I think that goes back to like what Andrew was saying earlier about us expanding production. Is like all the stuff we're doing on the property to build soil, it does limit us in terms of how much we can produce on acreage. So like we can always expand the number of or the quantity of vegetables we're growing, but then we're going to start sacrificing some grazing land for chickens, basically, and it's going to make that whole puzzle that we're trying to put together constantly and keep these things moving and rotating that much more challenging to figure out. So I would say like we're in a pretty good spot now with the number of chickens we have and the acreage we have in cash crops that we can keep everything moving without wanting to pull our hairs out every day. But
and just to clarify for people who might not be familiar with this practice, are you talking about moving a pasture area or establishing a pasture area post-harvest in an area of veggie production so that the chickens can come through and
sure.
take over anytime?
I'll just explain the rotation. So what we have is a 5-year rotation. It's 3 years in vegetables and 2 years in pasture. And then we sneak a grain crop somewhere or two in that system, depending on what shoulder we're on. And so we have two really strong sort of regenerative restoration periods there where we're grazing and resting the land. And this all moves throughout the farm. We have 35 blocks that are a little less than a half acre each, and this whole thing is doing this dance. And it's pretty much set in play for 5 years. And there's changes and tweaking that we have to do, but it's pretty well established. And so those chickens are just moving around. The sheep go first, the chickens come second. And then sometimes maybe at the end of the year, the sheep might swing back around where chickens were.
And And they're depositing manure into those areas, which is
a lot of fertility and a lot of bacteria, gut bacteria, which is really important for the biology, which is something I think that we really underestimate the power of that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And have the use of these principles, I think you've just answered this, but have the use of these regenerative principles influenced the layout of the farm or the inclusion of various processes and animals on the land?
Yeah, it was pretty much designed at the beginning, not without some challenges. I mean, we only this, we've been at this for 5 years now. This is our 5th year, I believe, and in terms of sort of taking on the whole farm and trying to figure out this holistic sort of approach. And only now am I really starting to feel like, okay, we are really starting to bring home this in and starting to feel like this could become more routine and not feel so kind of wild and crazy. But well worth it. But just there's a learning curve here.
Yeah, we're getting better at organizing the chaos.
Yeah.
But, farms are chaos. Vegetable farms particularly tend to be a little chaotic. A lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And fog.
Yeah, and fog.
And I think that we've kind of touched on this as well, but the practices of regenerative agriculture are an inherent part of the farm's plan and purpose. But could you talk about how these methods also benefit your community in terms of the ecology or the climate impacts?
Well, certainly say a few words about the ecology. Like, we have a tremendous amount of biodiversity on the farm now. I mean, mainly noticeably in the bird populations. We are seeing a lot of activity in that sense. We have a lot of habitat here mixed into our farm system. And we are seeing insect pressure going down in our crops, we believe. We wish that we had more baseline data to prove this, but I think it's going to really start to prove out if in fact that's happening over the next couple of years. And a lot of that, I think, is about having natural predators and more balance in our farm ecosystem. So, that's a benefit to the community, I believe.
Yeah.
That's one thought.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question too, which I don't know. I mean, like Andrew mentioned, we're trying to figure out ways to measure this. But anecdotally, it's done incredible things for the farm. In terms of that biodiversity we're seeing, we're also planning out a lot of habitat for native pollinators. So we're seeing like a huge uptick in beneficial insects, native bees and other pollinators. So yeah, I think it's all good stuff. In terms of the impact on climate, it's, we see it on the farm in terms of like water retention has been big for us because we just got a couple like kind of unusual rain events in the past few weeks. The way the soil handles water has changed a lot in the last couple of years. So I think it's all good stuff, and hopefully that positivity echoes out into the larger community.
Mm-hmm. And so
perfect.
Yeah, that's great. And some of that habitat, again, just for people who might not be familiar with this, that you're including or preserving on the farm, what might that look like? You mentioned areas for native pollinators. Are those wild areas of flowers? Do you have uncultivated areas? What are those habitat areas?
Yeah, we have
mix of everything, really.
We have borders and meadows along the borders. We have a dedicated staff person that's implementing a pollination strip program on the farm. So we have a dozen pollination strips on the farm. We tend to be really mindful of when we mow, so we will allow things to flower, and things can look a little untidy at times out here, but that's okay because there's a lot of life happening in those systems when you do that. So we're really conscientious about not over mowing. So some of our pastures get a little wild looking, but we know that they're providing a tremendous amount of habitat. And these pastures are all mixed within our, more or less within our rotational system. So there's habitat throughout the farm, active things going on.
And applying that idea of preserving the habitat kind of to the soil, the way that you're managing the soil, you mentioned that you're reducing tillage or trying to go fully no-till. What are you doing instead of tilling? And what is that preserving in your soil?
Okay, so I'm pretty obsessed with reduced tillage. And I've been going to California a lot to conferences because I'm really curious about what's happening in the bigger picture around the world. And I also think that it's important to note that if you can we're tractor scale, so if you can do this on 10 acres, you might be able to do it on 100. Who knows, you might even be able to do some of the things that we're playing around with on 1,000 acres. So I'm always conscious and thinking about that. But we've developed, when we started this process, there were some things that because I had 35 years of farming and tilling too much, that could be a detriment, but in my case, I think I actually used that positively. And I thought a lot about the equipment that I had been using and how I could change this up to create a system that was more biologically friendly, for lack of better words. So when we started this, we had a lot of compaction in the soil. We came at it with some pretty heavy pieces of equipment. We did some really deep subsoiling, like 20 inches down. Then we went to a chisel plow, which is a little bit more like a foot, and we would use it intermittently throughout the farm. And then now we're using something called a perfecta harrow. We only use that occasionally when we need to, which is less disturbance. And then we built a very customized zone tiller, which can do 1 to 4 rows, and it can do these little narrow strips of only like 3 to 4 inches wide. So, and this is all mixed in with, planting cover crops and rolling cover crops and rotating animals, which are creating this really charged biological soil, where there's a lot of soil aggregation. And over time, it used to be when I plowed out here, I could feel resistance on the tractor and through the implement on the seat of the tractor. Now when we plow, it feels soft. The soil, the life is getting down deep into the soil, and things are really changing. So this has been a systematic approach of just slowly over time reducing tillage and rethinking, like, is there a better way? Can we do a lot of customized machine, implementation here, work, building new tools. And it's working. I'm absolutely over the moon this season because we're seeing changes that I never thought possible in 5 years.
Amazing.
I don't know if that answers your question, but and just you have to talk really quickly just about the impacts of tillage. It's controversial out there right now. Organic farmers have to till a lot to maintain weeds, and they're feeling like they've got their backs up against the wall a little bit because the regen folks in big ag are pointing the finger that tillage is bad. And a certain amount of tillage is appropriate and reasonable and acceptable. But in many cases, we just overtill. And when we do that, we are degrading soils, we are compacting soils, we are destroying fungal networks, and you begin to go down, you see soil degradation. Mm-hmm. So we are pushing it as hard as we can in the other direction to see just how far we can take this and what kind of obstacles we can run into along the way.
Mm-hmm. And I'm interested that you mentioned that Big Ag is pointing the fingers about tillage because can you share what they're using instead of tillage?
Well, yeah, of course they're using Roundup and herbicides, and I want to be really clear and open about this. I'm on the fence. I think the science is pretty clear around what synthetic inputs can do to soil life, but I also think that we need an on-ramp to get farmers to think differently about soil health. And herbicides aren't going away tomorrow. Eventually there might be a solution. But if we can get farmers to, do less tillage and to grow more cover crops and start to think in a different way, then that's positive. But it's not for me, one of the principles of regenerative to me is if you're really truly regenerative, you have to be open-minded to the possibilities of reducing synthetic inputs. Like, it has to be core, in my opinion, to this whole regenerative movement, that you have to be on a track where you understand the natural systems can eventually do things that you won't need all these synthetic inputs for.
Mm-hmm. But it's a time-intensive process, right? You've been working on this for years.
Absolutely. And nobody, and you never, California, I see some of these bigger farmers that are struggling with this, and I've talked to these huge farmers out there, and I encourage them to just take 10 acres aside and just try it on 10 acres. Like, don't try to do 100 or 200. It's like, just, see what you can do on a very small scale, because you can learn so much in just a little area if you apply enough time. But these are not quick things. You have to invest time, many multiple seasons to learn.
And it's risk. I think that's an important piece too for these larger farms, is there is risk associated with it. We said earlier, we're in this privileged position as a nonprofit, as our goal was to play around with these systems and figure them out. But farmers need some support in transitioning, so they're not going to take a financial hit if they don't figure it out in their first year.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and if it's financially damaging, it's not sustainable, and they'll
Right.
be off the path, right? So I appreciate you saying that a lot. Do you have any success stories you would like to share? You've already shared some.
A couple, yeah. So we have been working with this farmer named Lincoln Fishman from Western Mass, and he has been growing annual cropping systems in semi-permanent white clover, Dutch white clover. So you have a perennial clover system where you plant an annual crop into. And he has about 20 farmers in a program now that are participating in sort of these studies. And we signed on last year, and we had sort of a 50-50 results. We had a really successful tomato crop and not such a great successful brassica planting into Dutch white clover. And this year we trialed it again on 4 crops. And it's working quite well, actually, and we're pretty excited about it because it really minimizes the need to disturb the soil a lot for maybe 3 to 4 year period, depending on how well your clover can survive. And the tool that we had already been developing is working well, this strip tilling tool in the clover system. So we're developing a lot of work around this concept of having annuals growing into this perennial system. So that's one really exciting thing. Other really exciting thing is we're just starting now to come into our pasture mixes where we've been grazing and bring them back around into a vegetable cycle. And we're seeing tremendous changes and tremendous health in this round of this whole cycle. And we're finding that we hardly have to till the soil at all to get things planted into the system and growing again. But we do this by using silage tarps, which is our Roundup. We basically take these huge sheets of plastic out and we fry the grass for 10 days or so, or maybe 2 weeks. We pull it off and then we can plant into it. But that shocked me that we basically are going to be able to go back after a 5-year cycle, go right back into vegetables without any major tillage. Mm-hmm. So super excited about that. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of other things going on as well. But.
Yeah. And so people have an idea of what that might look like. These are black plastic sheets, right, that you're taking out and basically solarizing an area. Correct. So that it smothers it.
Big 50 by 150 sheets, and we have 10 or 12 of them, and they're always on the move. So when we terminate a cover crop, depending on the timing and how soon we want to get in there to plant another crop, we will roll them down with a roller cripper, and we will tarp them for maybe 10 days and terminate them, and then pull the tarp off and then plant right into them. Mm-hmm. So it's a really important tool on smaller to medium-sized farms, but it's not going to work on a big 1,000-acre farm, of course, unfortunately.
You have a special collaboration for research purposes with the Woodwell Climate Research Center. Would you like to share a bit about that and the importance of science to what you do?
Yeah, I think, I should clarify in the beginning that this is a project we're hoping to do with Woodwell. We've been talking about it for a long time, and we're kind of loosely preparing for it, but it does come down to fundraising. So we're hoping that we're going to start it in the next year, but it speaks to this larger thing that they're really passionate about, too, obviously, as a climate research center, about how these growing practices are really affecting the climate, the larger ecosystem. And it's something that now that we're getting into this position of seeing really good anecdotal evidence in our fields and noticing all this biodiversity change and how our soils are handling water, all that stuff, is like, now we need the data. Because when you're trying to show people what you're doing and convince them what you're doing is good and worth it, you need data. They don't, us showing pictures of soil clumps and stuff only goes so far. It goes pretty far, but probably not as far as it could if there was hard science behind it. So basically, this project is going to model from 3 to 5 years how different soil amendments and tillage practices affect soil health and larger ecosystem health in terms of leachate coming out of the soil, respiration of gases coming off the soil, and nutrient retention in the soil as we grow crops and cover crops in it. So do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, also we'll be looking at nutrient density, and I think that's an important discussion that people are having in this whole regenerative movement and world. I think there's a lot of science that needs to be improved around that. I follow it somewhat, and it's a little confusing to me just how it appears as though there's a lot more to learn in that realm. But nutrient density, also just maybe doing some really more advanced biological analysis of what's happening in the microbial communities in the soil. There's a lot of advancing science around that, and I think in the next 10 years from now, it'll be a lot different than it is today. So that will be an important piece. And yeah, basically what this will be is there'll be 5 basically plots with 3 randomized pieces, sections. And there'll be 4 treatments of like a Dutch white clover, a compost treatment, a wood chip treatment, and a biochar treatment. And then there'll be a grazing overlay where grazing will only happen on half of all of this whole parcel. So we'll get to see the effects of animals in the system, which will be really interesting. That's something I'm really curious about. And then one of the things that, I'm really excited about is just seeing if these systems are in fact moving carbon deeper into the soil profile. There's a lot of controversy about that, particularly in conventional systems. And one of the reasons I'm really inspired about this project is, from what I gather going to these conferences, is that there's not a lot of research on these highly regenerative, organic, long-term studies of soil systems. And I think that just, the work that we're doing here just happens to fall into that category beautifully. And I think there's a real opportunity to see if we can get long-term carbon storage down into the soil profile deeper. And we're kind of seeing that. We're seeing like Brown's dark soil getting down to almost a foot now, where it used to be at 6 inches. So we feel in our gut, I feel this is already happening, but we need science to know for sure. And, maybe we'll find out things aren't as good as we think, or hopefully we'll find out they're better than we thought. So we're really excited about this project, the possibilities of this on the farm.
Mm-hmm. That's really exciting. And this leads right into my next comment. Farmers are in countless ways leading the way in community climate preparedness and working as innovators in building shared community resilience and educating the public about the science of soil biology. Have you always felt that as part of your work? Education and public outreach seem to be a very important part of what you do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in terms of this style of agriculture, we as a larger human community are facing down this big, seemingly insurmountable problem of climate change, which is going to be catastrophic to how we live our lives. So I think everyone realizes that, we need to change how we do things across every sector. Agriculture is just one piece of it. So I think when we started it too, it's, this in our minds is how are we going to grow food in a more equitable way and a more ecologically responsible way. And if we can do it, how do we get other people to start doing it too? So I think for any farmer who's doing this, it's part of it is just showing and sharing. It's a big wheel to have to turn, and the more people you have trying to turn it, the better.
That's well said. I would add to that there's one of the things that I found when I first started, engaging in the regenerative farming discussion was that there's a lot of information sharing and a lot of excitement around it. So farmer to farmer conferences or connections or collaboratives are just really powerful, and that's where I learned get a lot of my information from. And when we started this project, we were really thinking more locally. Now we're tied into some cohorts of other farmers around the region working on reduced tillage, and we have a few other irons in the fire. And, I don't think none of us 5 years ago could imagine where we are today with this project. And I think now I'm feeling like there's a real responsibility in the work that we're doing here and sharing it with others. And we're a little handicapped in the sense we're on Martha's Vineyard. It's hard to get to, but, maybe at some point we can have housing here and people can come and stay. And, for the weekend on Martha's Vineyard wouldn't be so bad, and engage in farming activities out here and learn about the work that we're doing. Mm-hmm. So I think that our mission is shifting a bit, really, to be honest with you. That it's becoming more educational around regenerative ag.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about agricultural policy in the United States, in the 2024 Farm Bill or the Inflation Reduction Act, has your farm used any federal programs or state funding to support your work, or have you turned to other funding sources?
Yeah, over the years, we've definitely gotten plenty of grants from the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. They've been very big supporters of ours, especially in the earlier years when we were trying to get this place started and start growing our own food. A lot of the infrastructure that we needed, both in terms of field stuff and wash and pack setups and all that stuff, was coming from MDAR funding. NRCS gave us a grant a few years ago to upgrade the water system at the farm so we could irrigate properly. So yeah, federal and state government has been huge supporters of what we're doing. And then we are a nonprofit, so we have had individuals who support our work through donations, basically. There's some of those who are larger donors who really care about agriculture, regenerative agriculture, composting the way that we're composting, who have supported our work. And then it's just a lot of smaller individual donors as well who just believe in the larger work of IGI, Island Grown, and how we're working the farming piece into everything else we're doing.
What kinds of specific programs or funding would be helpful to your farming operations, or where could you be better supported?
Yeah, sure.
Take a shot at one thought that I'm actually just repeating something, hopefully to a wide audience, that another farmer shared recently with me. But he said that the number one thing, the impact he thought that could have on small farms, medium-sized farms maybe, would be to make a no-till drill seeder available to every farmer across the country. And so when we started this project, we had a lot of older equipment, dilapidated equipment, a lot of it, and we worked with that. But over time, each year, we have added something that would help our regenerative journey, specifically for retooling the farm. And early on, we got one of these through an MDAR grant, one of these seeders, and it made a huge difference. So I think that we need to think about how do you retool agriculture, small-scale agriculture, and give them, the tools and the funding to help make steps that might otherwise seem like a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that I wanted to share around that question.
Yeah. I mean, equipment grants, like Andrew said, have been huge for us. Like every year we've added something that has now become a crucial piece of how we're doing things. So that's a big one. And then, I keep saying we're a nonprofit, so we're in this kind of privileged position, but for for-profit farmers who are worried about their bottom line, like any sort of financial incentive to encourage them to try some of this stuff without putting their income at risk would be huge. So that's all I have to add, I think.
Maybe support for the period of transition, or like Andrew said, some of those tool replacements that would allow them to use different methods.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we are working through Momentum Ag on some kind of funding. I don't know the exact details about, there's some funding, climate smart funding out there for rewarding practices. And I think, some of that, I mean, in any industry, the solar industry, whatever it may be, government is there to help incentivize and start up, right? Help. And so I think there's probably something that can be done around that's meaningful as well.
Right.
Are there any sustainability or climate-related issues that you would like to see your member of Congress address?
Can you say all of them?
All of the above.
All of the above. Everything we got to do. Yeah, I don't. It's such a large problem, and it affects every sector. So it's like you want them to move on every component of it all at once.
Well, I've heard Ray Achille say if we could just get every farmer in America to cover a crop, that in and of itself would just be, a massive environmental, win for, our climate. I don't think that in and of itself, conservation agriculture is necessarily going to save us. But that's it's hard to fathom how we can have so much bare ground, still, when we know so much now. Across our nation. We fly over in the wintertime, and there's some dry regions where it's hard to do, and I get that there are challenges at times where we occasionally will have some bare ground in the winter. But that's the one thing that's just so obvious, such a no-brainer. But I think it's important that we really have more honest discussion about what really is regenerative agriculture and how many chemicals do we want to keep pouring into the system, and can we even call that regenerative agriculture? It's a really hot topic in California right now, where they're trying to define regenerative agriculture for the purpose of funding grants through their State Department of Ag, and there's a lot of people weighing in on that from different angles. But I think it's just a really important conversation to have, and there's a lot of money in agriculture. There's a lot of money to be made in agriculture, and a lot of it's probably really unnecessary, and I don't think that we're being that honest about the alternatives on a federal level and state level sometimes. That's a really honest view from my trying to be very polite about it too. I've watched the hearings. They had the first soil health hearing ever in Congress a while back, or the Senate held a hearing on soil health. And you could feel in that room the power of lobbying and the power of the system of food that we've created around chemical inputs and and regulation and stuff. And we're not going to make it as a species if we don't solve this problem. I don't think we're going to make it over the long haul. So as climate bears down us and we have less resiliency in these agricultural systems, we could find ourselves in trouble, and it feels pretty fragile to me when I drive around the country and look at how we're farming right now.
That's really important. Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask if you have anything else you would like to add about the fragile nature of our farming operations.
We really went down the wrong road about 70 years ago, on a lot of fronts, not just agriculture, but, and I feel like we're really, beginning to pay the price for that. And we're not beginning, we've been paying it for a really long time. I don't think that we really account for all the environmental damage that we've done to our water systems. And just think about the Gulf of Mexico. And I think there's so much opportunity to do restorative agriculture, restorative ecosystem restoration around the planet. I think it's got to be one of the top 5 priorities of our time. And we've proven, and others, there's so much evidence out there, how quickly you can restore or begin the path of restoration. You just look at COVID, when COVID hit, and how there's some wild things that happened around the planet when all of a sudden humans just slowed down for a few days or a few months. So I'm hopeful, but I'm also, concerned. And it's truthfully what drives me now. This project is not about, it's really about demonstrating that there's alternatives, really, and that they can work, and they can work financially. They need to be financially viable. Most large, really serious regenerative farmers, I think, will tell you that they're having more fun than they used to. And I think fun is really important. I think we have a lot of probably stressed farmers out there in the world that aren't really necessarily enjoying what the work that they're doing, or might find it to be a lot more pleasurable if they could get more connected with the earth again in a more meaningful way. So this is about fun for me. It's about viability. These systems have to be more viable. And generally speaking, I think these regenerative systems are going to improve the bottom line of our farmers. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm. And our survival.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be so serious on this one, but it's really...
It's a serious topic. I mean, yeah.
I mean, I want to cry when I drive around California and look at how we are treating the earth out there. It just breaks my heart. And we need a whole systems approach and a radical change to how we move food, grow food, access food. It's not just the farm. It shouldn't all be on the farmers by any means.
Yeah.
And just to bring things back to nutrition and food access for a moment, would the reduction of SNAP benefits impact the markets that you're involved with or your own mobile market operation?
Yeah, I mean, it's... I don't know why anyone would want to be reducing the benefit. I mean, people who need a little bit of assistance, you're putting the ability to buy locally produced food in their hands. So it's just like, it hurts farmers, it hurts the people in need of food assistance, and it just continues this cycle of, people buying cheaper and cheaper food that's probably processed. And it's foolish to reduce. It would be foolish to reduce funding for those benefits. It's a huge part of what we do is just trying to connect people of all income brackets, whatever, of every type of need to come to the farm and see how food is produced. We want to be like a community farm for everybody. So, in terms of like business, like it's not going to impact our business so much, but it's just like a moral thing. We want to connect more people to their local farms. There's people definitely on the island who use the benefits and need the benefits. So reducing that would be directly harmful for them. And
also just in general, organic food or well-grown raised food is more expensive. It costs more money. But do we want healthy nutritional food or do we want really poor nutritional food?
It goes back to being an equity thing, right? It's like, should people with more money and whatever be the ones that have access to more nutritionally dense food? It's not equitable. And like I said, I'm sure other farmers feel the same way. It's like, you want everyone to have access to your food. I wouldn't be farming if I was just trying to sell food to people who could afford really expensive tomatoes. Especially in Martha's Vineyard, where there's such a disparity in income between those summer visitors and the people who live here year round. We want to make sure this food is accessible to everyone, and SNAP and HIP is an important piece of that for us and every other farmer, I would imagine.
Is there anything else you would like to share?
No, I just want to say that I think regenerative farming is our future, and we'll argue over and battle over what regenerative is probably for another decade or two. But I don't think there's anything stopping this train at this point. I think this train is moving forward. It's not moving as fast as it needs to. But I think it needs to embrace all types of agriculture need to embrace it and figure out how to, and embrace it. I mean, really getting down and understand the importance of it in the future of our well-being and our planet.
Well put.
Thank you very much for your time and sharing all of this expertise this morning. Thank you for growing healthy food and for educating us all on the path forward and the ways that we can do this. It has been really wonderful to speak with you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this.
Our pleasure. Take care.
Thanks for joining us. Links to the interview guests, farms, and topics discussed can be found in the episode notes. The Farm Voices podcast is produced by the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, a working group of climate reality project leaders and chapter members. Please subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share the episode with others. It helps us raise the visibility of this important information, and we greatly appreciate your support. Join us in the next episode for more on the 2024 Farm Bill and farms and ranches practicing regenerative and conservation agriculture methods. Have a great week!